As we come into adulthood, we find ourselves responsible for more and more recurring expenses, things like rent, mortgage, phone bills, and other expenses that occur regularly on a monthly basis or on an annual basis. I used to have a lot of subscriptions, especially around the time that I started my YouTube channel. If you followed me at that time, I was essentially a beauty box reviewer, and I had a ton of subscriptions of all beauty boxes. This expanded to lifestyle boxes, all sorts of different subscriptions that were just for fun. It was a lot of money, but it brought me a lot of joy and it became quite a hobby. But then it got to be too much. It was too much stuff, too much clutter. I was paying a lot of money for these subscriptions and they were no longer bringing me joy. I started cutting back and I started experimenting with reducing my expenses, and that meant also reducing a lot of my subscriptions. When we switch to the screen of my recurring expenses, you'll see that they are at quite a sustainable level in terms of me not having to work full time to maintain my lifestyle. I can very easily maintain it on my part-time active income as well as passive income. With that preamble out of the way, let's jump into the spreadsheet and I'm going to show you all of my recurring expenses. This is a quick spreadsheet I put together for my recurrences, and I want to mention that I do have other expenses besides these. These are only my recurring expenses that are automated, so they either get charged to my credit card or come directly out of my bank account. This does not include ad hoc expenses that I pay throughout the year on things like food and vet bills, etc. So these are only my subscriptions or my automated recurring expenses. I guess we'll start with the bottom line first, and that is this number here. Around $7,000 per year is how much I have in terms of my recurring expenses. So this annual number could be higher than what you have in terms of recurring expenses depending on whether you live at home with your family, or maybe this number is a lot lower than what you pay on an annual recurring basis because you have a bigger home or you have kids. So this is a culmination of many different life decisions. We're not really comparing apples to apples when we look at one life versus another. So I just want to say that right off the bat. In terms of a universal message for this video, the number isn't it, but I do want to say that most, if not all of us, can reduce our recurring expenses in some way. And it's my hope that you can get some ideas from this video if that's an area that you're wanting to explore. Now that we have this overall number out of the way, I'm not really going to reference it any further. I'm going to mainly talk in percentages and concepts. The next thing I want to talk about before we jump into the line items is how I've categorized my overall number. I've used three categories, home being the highest, which is at around 70% of my recurring expenses, and I don't think that's unusual. The balance of the 30% mainly go into work and leisure, and this is where my categories might be very different from yours. In terms of work, this represents around 20% of my recurring expenses. I'll go into why that is. If you have a career that's a traditional 9 to 5, you're not going to have some of these expenses that I've categorized as work. So this really is dependent on how you view the expenses in your life. So I wouldn't use this as a benchmark at all. This is just the way my brain works and how I've categorized things. Leisure represents the balance of 10%, and I'm going to go into what this is. But if you look at the line items above, you can see that I only have two expenses in the leisure category, and that is phone and movies. So I'll talk about that in more detail as we go through the line items, which we're about to do now. In terms of the line items, I want to quickly show that I have two different categories, and these are shared expenses as well as personal expenses. Let's look at the shared expenses first. These are the expenses that I share 50-50 with hubby. So as you can see, most of these are home expenses. $5,000 per year represents my portion, and hubby would have the exact same amount. The internet is something that I've categorized as a work expense, and that's because I work from home and I work remotely. The reason we split this 50-50 is because hubby also uses the internet because he lives here as well and he uses a lot of streaming services and such, so we don't have the internet exclusively for my work. And even though having access to the internet is technically a luxury and perhaps not a necessity, but it also kind of is a necessity because we've become so reliant on the internet. The last expense that we have that is shared are the movies. This is more of something that hubby really enjoys, and so we decided to try out this movie subscription subscription. We basically get one ticket a month, so we do have to pay for the second ticket. It's worth the money for us because he derives a lot of enjoyment from it, and I really enjoy the movies that we go to watch as well. Although if it were up to me, I probably would not have this subscription, but because hubby enjoys it so much, I'm happy to partake in this. So this expense is around $11 a month, which we split in half. So it's not that much money, but we do again pay for the companion tickets, and hubby also buys snacks at the concession. Even though I'm only showing $70 as my portion of this expense, this is really only the recurring expense that we get billed monthly. The actual cost of us going to the movies together and having snacks is of course much higher, more than double this amount. Now let's flip to my personal expenses, and I've got roughly the same number of expenses. My personal expenses are mostly for work, and I categorize work a little bit differently now. I have a part-time job at a writing studio that is my paid work, and I also have creative work that I'm not really paid for. That's more of a hobby. I'm categorizing my creative activities or my hobbies as work because I have a long history of prioritizing paid work, and I wanted to shift my mindset around that. I want my hobbies to be just as fulfilling and just as important in my mind as income generating work. So this is a very specific way of categorizing that I think might be unique to my situation and what I want to accomplish in terms of my mindset moving forward. So even though my website is mainly a hobby website, I do have a book that I wrote that I sell on my website, but I would not consider this a business. My website is mainly a personal website. I use it to organize my thoughts, my recipes, my personal projects, etc. But I do want to think of this website as a work expense because it is important to me. This is where I want to be putting my effort into my personal creative projects. So that's why I categorized it as work. I could have very easily categorize this as leisure or a hobby. I pay around $400 per year for my website, and I should mention that all of these numbers are estimates or approximate values. I pay for my website in US dollars, and the exchange rate, of course, is always fluctuating. I also added this as a subscription this year. This is an add-on to my website, and it gives me the ability to send email campaigns. So I started a newsletter with the launch of my book, and I thought this would be a good way for me to keep up with my blog posts and also experiment with some different forms of content. So unfortunately, this is an additional subscription. So this adds $200 per year approximately to the cost of my website. I'm really experimenting right now with this. I'm going to continue with my newsletters in 2024, and then I'm going to reassess with whether I want to continue with this. I may not need this add-on after that, and at that point I will cancel it. I have become very good at canceling things when I'm not using them anymore, and I think that's really important to look at your subscriptions and cancel the ones you're not using, or try to reduce the cost if you can, because they can really creep up. People often forget. Perhaps you don't even see it if you don't look at your credit card statements and such. So there are a lot of reasons why revisiting this periodically is beneficial for our financial health, and I highly recommend doing this exercise, going through your recurring expenses that are automated at least once a year. If you do check your credit card statements, you will see that there are certain expenses that recur every month, and if you're not using them anymore, that will be your cue to perhaps cancel them. But if you're not checking your credit card statements, then going through this exercise once a year will help you curate your subscriptions so that you have the ones that you truly need or want or use. That brings me to my Adobe subscription. I subscribed to the Adobe Creative Cloud when I was working on my book, and it came in super handy. But now that I'm done my book and I'm not working on a new one just yet, I haven't been using this subscription as much. I pay around $600 per year for this subscription currently. I was on an introductory rate for the first year, so I was paying maybe around 70% of what I'm paying now. And because I was using it, it was money well spent. Now that I'm not using it anymore, I actually did reassess and I decided to cancel. But when I went to cancel, of course, they gave all of these different discounts. And one of the discounts was to keep my membership and not pay for the next 60 days. So I would essentially get 2 free months of membership. So I decided to hang on to it for now because of that. But in 2 months' time, try to cancel it again and see if there's another discount. If there is, I may keep it depending on how I feel during that time. But if there isn't a discount, I am fine to cancel it and try to find some other way to do my creative projects right now. And when I'm ready to write another book and I need InDesign, I will subscribe to it again. So this is something that I do quite often. If I subscribe to something new, I usually have a plan for when I'm going to cancel. I will put this on my to-do list so I don't forget, because I don't want to pay for a month that I'm not going to use. I really want to cancel on a timely basis, so I will look at the terms and see when I can cancel. And I'll put this on my to-do list so it pops up and I remember to cancel when I intended to. I also cancel subscriptions pretty much right away if I find I'm not using them that frequently. I know that if I cancel a subscription, I can always resubscribe when I want to start up again. That brings us to my last work subscription, which is something called TickTick. This is a to-do list app and I love it so much. This has become essential to the way I organize my life and it gives me peace of mind, so it's well worth the $40 a year that I pay for it. My last personal expense is my phone, and I have categorized this as leisure because when I think about it, I actually don't need my phone. I have it because I love it. It provides me with convenience and enjoyment and connection, but do I actually need it? Probably not. I'm at home a lot of the time, so I can use my home internet. And when I'm on my phone at home, it's connected to Wi-Fi anyway. So do I actually need my plan? Probably not. But it comes in so handy when I go out. And I also love playing Pokemon Go. There are many reasons why I love my phone, but I do think of it more as a leisure item. Coming back to the full picture, there are only a couple other things I wanted to point out. This is mostly in terms of my home expenses. So these first two fees are not negotiable. In terms of condo fees, I can do my part in trying to keep expenses down. Of course, hubby and I are just one unit in a big building, so how much we can affect the overall expenses of the building is probably pretty small. We still do our part because I personally don't like to waste water or electricity and that sort of thing. Home insurance, though, you can shop around and you can negotiate this. I don't do it every year because I don't really like talking to customer service. So when the increase is around 5, 10, 15%, I might just let it go. But one time our home insurance company tried to increase our rate by, I think it was like 30%. So then I did get on the phone and talk to customer service about possible discounts or ways to reduce our bill, and I was able to do that. So this is an area where if I put some effort in, I probably could get our expense down a little bit, but it depends on what else I have on the go and where my priorities are at, because it does take time and it does take a lot of mental effort for me to do this, and sometimes it's just not worth it. Sometimes I'll just pay the increase, and this might be a year where I just pay the increase. It's 15%, so it's a little on the high side, but I can also understand it, and maybe I will put it on my list to either shop around or to call next year to talk about discounts. A couple of other notes that I want to mention that I've included down below that we haven't gotten to yet is that hubby takes care of our streaming services. He really loves watching shows and movies and such, and if it were up to me, I would probably just cancel everything because I don't tend to watch TV all that much. I think if I were involved in our decisions for streaming services, I would probably lean on the side of canceling. But because hubby derives so much enjoyment from it, he takes care of what we're subscribed to as well as paying for it, which is very nice of him. Hubby is really good at finding discounts. He looks on red flag deals a lot, so I'm not even sure what we're subscribed to right now. I know we're subscribed to Netflix, and I think he has Tubi, but I'm not too sure what that is. We also have Roku, but I don't know if that's a subscription. I know we did cancel Amazon Prime. I don't have all the details because I don't get involved with this, and I think hubby would prefer it that way. And the last thing I want to mention, which is a big thing, is that I'm covered under hubby's work insurance plan. We also live in Canada, so we have a provincial health plan that we're covered for. And then things like dental care, vision care, prescription drugs, those are under hubby's insurance plan. I think he does pay for a portion of the premium, but it gets deducted from his payroll. In any event, we don't split this expense. I don't know what it is, and I don't think he really monitors it either. That's the other thing that's different about me and hubby. I track my finances and I track all of our shared expenses, and hubby doesn't track his expenses at all. Hubby's pretty good with his finances as far as I can tell, and we don't really pay too much attention to each other's spending. But we do chat about finances in general just to make sure we're aligned and that our priorities are similar. We've already pretty much talked about the patterns that I've noticed. I'm pretty wary of subscriptions now and I try to use them sparingly, and I think this is likely due to my history with beauty boxes. I have no qualms about canceling subscriptions that I don't need or want anymore, but as you can see in my current subscriptions, they're pretty much all keeps, and that's probably because I cancel things so immediately when I don't use them anymore that at the end of the year, if I look at my subscriptions again, the ones that I have are the ones that I truly want. And that is really important to me. Before I came into this exercise, I was really worried that my subscriptions had crept up and that there were a lot of things I would want to cancel. But this is quite reassuring to know that I'm keeping everything very consciously, and even Adobe, even though I plan to let it go, I am keeping it for the time being, and I will reassess in a couple of months' time. I haven't let recurring subscriptions creep back into my life ever since my beauty box days, and I am really happy about that. I have no issue paying for subscriptions that bring me joy and that provide me with a lot of value. I think that's really important to have something that is joyful and fun and uplifting, but I don't have any subscriptions that fit that bill. Instead, I choose to buy things more on an ad hoc basis, and I'm really selective now about the things that I bring into my home. That is all I wanted to talk about in terms of my recurring expenses. This exercise is part of my book, Authenblissity Reset. I'll be back later this month with a full recap on how I did with my money reset. Until then, please take care, and bye for now.